The chains were heavy. They bit into the skin of his wrists like hungry teeth, and every step he took made them rattle against the cold metal floor. Sergeant Tae-ho kept his head high as the guards pushed him forward. He was a soldier of Earth. He would not show fear. The hallway stretched before him like a river of darkness. Purple lights glowed from the walls, casting strange shadows that danced and twisted. The air smelled different here. It was thick and sweet, like flowers that grew on distant worlds. Tae-ho had never been inside a Valari ship before. No human had ever walked these halls and lived to tell the story. Until now, the guards beside him were tall. They stood almost 8 feet high, their bodies wrapped in silver armor that reflected the purple light. Their faces were hidden behind masks, but Tae-ho could see their eyes. They were gold, like coins, and they watched him with cold interest. The Valari did not like humans. The war between their two species had lasted for 15 years, and millions had died on both sides. Tae-ho remembered the battle. It had happened only hours ago, though it felt like a lifetime. His ship, the Horizon, had been on patrol near the border zone. They were a small crew of 30 soldiers. It was supposed to be a quiet mission. But the Valari had other plans. 3 warships had appeared from behind a moon. They came without warning, their weapons firing before the Horizon could even raise its shields. The battle lasted only 12 minutes. Tae-ho watched his friends die. He watched the ship break apart around him. When the smoke cleared, only 5 humans remained alive. Now there was only 1. The other 4 had been taken to a different part of the ship. Tae-ho did not know what happened to them. He tried not to think about it. Instead, he focused on the path ahead. The guards were taking him somewhere important. He could feel it in the way they walked. Their steps were careful and measured. They were not taking him to a prison cell. They were taking him to someone. The hallway ended at a massive door. It was made of black metal, and strange symbols covered its surface. They glowed with a faint blue light, like stars trapped in stone. One of the guards pressed his hand against a panel on the wall. The symbols flashed, and the door began to open. The room beyond was huge. It stretched upward like the inside of a cathedral, with pillars of white crystal reaching toward a ceiling that disappeared into darkness. Hundreds of Valari stood along the walls, their golden eyes fixed on the human prisoner. They wore robes of different colors. Some were red, some were blue. Some were black like the night sky. They whispered to each other as Tae-ho entered, their voices like the sound of wind through leaves. At the far end of the room stood a throne. It was made of the same white crystal as the pillars, and it caught the light in ways that made it seem alive. Someone sat upon it. A figure dressed in robes of pure white, with a veil covering her face. Tae-ho knew who she was. Every human knew. The queen of the Valari Empire. The guards stopped walking. They pushed Tae-ho to his knees, and the chains pulled tight against his arms. Pain shot through his shoulders, but he did not cry out. He kept his eyes forward, staring at the figure on the throne. A Valari in black robes stepped forward. He was older than the others, with lines on his face and silver threads in his dark hair. He held a staff in one hand, and he struck it against the floor 3 times. The sound echoed through the great hall like thunder. "You stand before Her Majesty, Queen Lyra of the Valari Empire," the Old One announced. His voice was deep and cold. "You are a prisoner of war. You are an enemy of our people. You have been brought here to face judgment." Tae-ho said nothing. What could he say? He was a soldier who had fought against the Valari. He had killed their warriors in battle. He had no excuse and no defense. The only thing waiting for him was death. The whispers in the room grew louder. The Valari were excited. They wanted to see human blood spill on their crystal floor. Tae-ho could feel their hatred pressing against him like a physical weight. He was an insect to them, a pest that needed to be crushed. The queen raised one hand, and the whispers stopped immediately. The silence that followed was so complete that Tae-ho could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. Slowly, the queen rose from her throne. Her white robes flowed around her like water, and her movements were graceful and smooth. She began to walk toward him. The court watched in surprise. It was not normal for the queen to approach a prisoner. It was not proper. Some of the Valari started to speak, but the old one in black silenced them with a sharp look. No one questioned the queen. She stopped just a few feet from where Teho knelt. He could see the edge of her veil, the fabric moving slightly with her breath. Her hands were pale, with long fingers that ended in silver nails. She stood there for a long moment, looking down at him. Then she spoke. "Do you remember me, soldier?" Her voice was soft. It was gentle, like the voice of someone speaking to an old friend. Teho felt his heart freeze in his chest. The words did not make sense. He had never met the queen of the Valari. He had never even seen her face. How could she know him? "Your Majesty," the old one said, stepping forward with concern in his eyes. "This human is dangerous. Please, return to your throne. Let the guards handle this matter." But the queen ignored him. She reached up with both hands and slowly pulled away her veil. The face beneath was beautiful. Her skin was pale silver, and her eyes were gold like all Valari. But there was something else in those eyes. Something that made Teho's breath catch in his throat. He knew those eyes. He had seen them before. In a different time and a different place. 10 years ago, the queen said softly. On a frozen moon at the edge of nowhere. A crashed ship. A wounded girl. And a human soldier who could have walked away, but chose to stay. The memories came flooding back. They hit Teho like a wave crashing against rocks. The frozen moon. The broken ship. The alien girl with golden eyes and blood on her silver skin. He had been young then. Just a private, barely 20 years old. He had found her dying in the snow, and he had made a choice that changed everything. "Lyra," he whispered. The queen smiled. It was a small smile, sad and warm at the same time. "You remember," she said. The great hall erupted in chaos. The Valari shouted and screamed, unable to understand what was happening. The old one in black stared at the queen with shock written across his face. Guards moved forward, uncertain of what to do, but Teho saw none of it. He could only see the queen standing before him. The girl he had saved. The princess he had protected. The life he had chosen to spare when duty told him to do otherwise. And now, 10 years later, that choice had brought him here. To this moment. To this impossible meeting. He did not know if it would save him or doom him. But as he looked into her golden eyes, he realized something important. Some choices echo through time. Some acts of kindness are never forgotten. And sometimes, the universe has a way of bringing people back together. The queen turned to face her court. When she spoke, her voice was no longer soft. It was strong and clear, cutting through the chaos like a blade. "This human saved my life," she declared. "And today, I intend to save his." 10 years earlier, the universe was a different place. Private Teho was 20 years old and far from home. He had joined the United Earth Fleet because he wanted to see the stars. He wanted adventure and excitement. What he got instead was guard duty on a frozen moon called KX-7, watching empty ice fields and counting the days until his rotation ended. The moon was small and lifeless. Nothing grew there. Nothing lived there. The only sounds were the howling winds and the crunch of ice beneath his boots. Teho spent most of his time in the small outpost with 3 other soldiers. They played cards. They complained about the food. They dreamed about going home. The war with the Valari had been raging for 5 years at that point, but KX-7 was far from the fighting. It was a forgotten place, useful only as a waypoint for supply ships passing through the sector. No one important came here. No one important ever would. Or so Teho thought. It happened on his 3rd week of patrol. He was walking along the northern ridge, checking sensor equipment and trying to stay warm. The temperature was 40 degrees below zero, and his breath turned to ice the moment it left his mouth. He was thinking about the hot soup waiting for him back at the outpost when he saw it. A light falling from the sky. At first, he thought it was a meteor. They were common in this part of space. But as he watched, he realized the light was moving wrong. It was slowing down. It was trying to control its fall, and then he heard the sound, a terrible scream of metal breaking apart. A ship crashed into the ice field half a mile from where he stood. Taeho ran. His legs burned and his lungs ached, but he did not stop. He reached the crash site in less than 10 minutes. And what he found made his blood turn cold. The ship was Valari. He recognized the design from his training. It was a small craft, built for speed rather than combat. The hull was torn open like paper, and smoke poured from a dozen wounds in its silver skin. Fire burned in places despite the freezing cold. The ship was dying. Taeho should have called it in. He should have reported the crash to his commander and waited for orders. The Valari were the enemy. Any survivor from that ship was a threat that needed to be contained. That was what the rules said. That was what a good soldier would do. But Taeho was not thinking like a soldier that night. He was thinking like a human being. He climbed through the torn hull, pushing aside twisted metal and broken equipment. The smoke made his eyes water and his throat burn. He could barely see 3 feet in front of him, but he kept moving forward, searching for signs of life. He found her in what remained of the cockpit. She was young. Even through the blood and the bruises, he could tell she was young. Her silver skin was torn in several places, and one of her arms hung at a wrong angle. Gold blood pooled beneath her body, staining the white floor red. Her eyes were closed, and she was not moving. Taeho knelt beside her. He pressed 2 fingers against her neck, searching for a pulse. For a long moment, he felt nothing. Then, faint and weak, he felt it. A heartbeat. She was alive. He worked quickly after that. His training kicked in, and his hands moved without thinking. He stopped the bleeding first, using strips of cloth torn from his own uniform. He set her broken arm as best he could, binding it tight against her chest. He checked for other injuries, finding 3 broken ribs and a wound on her head that worried him deeply. Through it all, she did not wake. Her breathing was shallow and uneven. Her skin, which should have been warm silver, was turning gray. She was slipping away, and there was nothing more he could do for her here. He had to move her. Taeho lifted her in his arms. She weighed almost nothing, light as a child despite being nearly his own height. He carried her out of the burning ship and into the frozen night. The wind hit them like a wall of knives, but he kept walking. He could not take her to the outpost. His commander would ask questions. He would report the crash. The girl would become a prisoner of war, or worse. Instead, Taeho carried her to an old supply cave half a mile east. It was small and forgotten, used for storing emergency equipment that no one ever checked. The walls were stone, and the temperature inside was bearable. He laid her down on a pile of thermal blankets and covered her with everything he could find. Then he waited. The first night was the hardest. The girl did not wake, and her condition grew worse before it grew better. Taeho stayed by her side, changing her bandages and forcing water between her lips. He talked to her even though she could not hear him. He told her about Earth, about the blue oceans and the green forests, about his mother, who made the best soup in their small village, about his dreams of flying through the stars. He did not know why he talked so much. Maybe he was afraid of the silence. Maybe he just needed to hear a human voice in that cold, dark place. Whatever the reason, the words kept coming, hour after hour, until his throat was dry and his voice was gone. On the second day, she opened her eyes. Taeho was changing her bandages when he felt her gaze on him. He looked up and found himself staring into eyes of pure gold. They were beautiful and strange, like nothing he had ever seen. They watched him with a mixture of fear and confusion. "It is okay," he said softly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "You are safe. I am not going to hurt you." She tried to speak, but only a weak sound came out. Her lips moved, forming words in a language he did not understand. He shook his head gently. "I do not speak your language," he admitted. "But I understand fear when I see it. You are afraid. I would be afraid too if I woke up in a strange place with a stranger watching over me. But I promise you, I am here to help." She stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, something changed in her eyes. The fear began to fade, replaced by something else. Something that might have been trust. "Lyra," she whispered. Her voice was like music, soft and clear despite her injuries. "My name is Lyra." Taeho smiled. It was the first time he had smiled in weeks. "Taeho," he replied. "My name is Taeho. It is nice to meet you, Lyra." The next 2 days passed in a blur of small moments. Taeho brought food from the outpost, claiming he was going on extra patrols to explain his long absences. He stole medicine from the medical kit, hoping no one would notice. He learned to communicate with Lyra through gestures and simple words, building a language that belonged only to them. She told him, in broken phrases, that she had been running from people who wanted to hurt her. Her ship had been attacked, and she had barely escaped. She did not say who she was, or why anyone would want her dead. Taeho did not ask. He understood that some secrets were too heavy to share. On the third night, a rescue signal lit up the sky. Valari ships arrived just before dawn. They came in fast and low, their searchlights sweeping across the ice field. Taeho watched from the cave entrance, his heart pounding with fear. If they found him here with her, he would be killed. There was no question about that. But Lyra was already moving. She pulled herself to her feet, wincing with every motion. Her injuries were still serious, but determination burned in her golden eyes. "I must go," she said. Taeho nodded. He had known this moment would come. He had prepared for it. But now that it was here, he found that he did not want her to leave. "Will you be safe?" he asked. Lyra reached out and touched his face. Her fingers were cold, but her touch was gentle. "Because of you," she said, "I will live. I will not forget this. I will not forget you, Taeho." She pressed something into his hand. It was small and round, made of a metal he did not recognize. Strange symbols were carved into its surface, and it glowed with a faint inner light. "If you ever need me," she said, "show this to my people. They will know what it means." Then she walked out into the snow and disappeared into the lights of the rescue ships. Taeho stood alone in the cave, holding the strange token in his hand. He never told anyone what happened on that frozen moon. He never spoke of the Valari girl he had saved. The memory stayed locked inside his heart, a secret he carried through years of war and endless battles, until now, until the chains and the throne room and the queen who remembered his face. Some choices change everything. Some moments define who we are. And sometimes, the smallest act of kindness can echo through the years, shaping the future in ways we never expect. Taeho had learned that lesson 10 years ago on a frozen moon. Now, kneeling before the queen of the Valari Empire, he was about to learn it again. The throne room had become a storm of voices. Valari nobles shouted at each other across the crystal hall. Some pointed at Taeho with anger burning in their golden eyes. Others stared at the queen with disbelief written across their silver faces. The order that had existed moments ago was gone, replaced by chaos that grew louder with each passing second. The old advisor in black robes pushed through the crowd. His name was Doran, and he had served the royal family for 60 years. He had watched Lyra grow from a child into a queen. He had guided her through war and peace, through victory and loss. But never in all those years had he seen her do something like this. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice sharp with concern. "Please, we must speak in private. This is not appropriate. This human is a prisoner of war. He cannot be treated with special favor simply because of some past event that we know nothing about." Lyra turned to face him. Her golden eyes were calm, but there was steel beneath the surface. She had learned long ago how to hide her emotions behind a mask of royal composure. But Doran knew her better than most. He could see the determination in the set of her jaw. "This human saved my life," she said clearly, making sure everyone in the room could hear. 10 years ago, I was dying on a frozen moon. My ship had crashed. My guards were dead. I had nowhere to go, and no one to help me. And this man, this enemy, found me in the wreckage and chose to save me instead of kill me. The whispers began again. They spread through the crowd like fire through dry grass. The Valari looked at each other with confusion and doubt. Such a thing seemed impossible. Humans were brutal creatures. They were savages who understood nothing but violence. The idea that one of them would show mercy to a dying Valari was difficult to accept. Taeho remained on his knees, watching the scene unfold before him. His mind was still struggling to process everything that had happened. The wounded girl from the frozen moon was the queen of the Valari Empire. The life he had saved belonged to the most powerful woman in the galaxy. It seemed like a dream, too strange to be real, but the chains on his wrists reminded him that this was no dream. Lyra walked back toward him. She moved slowly, her white robes flowing behind her like waves on a silver sea. When she reached him, she knelt down so that their eyes were level. It was an act that shocked the entire court. Queens did not kneel before prisoners. Queens did not lower themselves to the level of common soldiers. But Lyra did not care about what queens were supposed to do. "I never forgot you," she said softly, speaking only to him now. "Every day for 10 years, I thought about you. I wondered where you were. I wondered if you were still alive. I prayed to the stars that you had found happiness somewhere far from this terrible war." Taeho swallowed hard. His throat felt tight, and his eyes burned with emotions he could not name. "I kept the token," he admitted. "The one you gave me. I kept it all these years." Lyra smiled. It was a real smile, warm and genuine, the kind of smile she had not shown anyone in a very long time. "I know," she said. "When my guards searched you after your capture, they found it. That is why I ordered you brought to me. I recognized it immediately." She reached into her robes and pulled out a small object. It was the token, the strange metal disc with the glowing symbols. She held it up so the court could see. "This is the royal seal of House Vera," she announced. "It has been passed down through my family for 1,000 generations. I gave it to this human on the night he saved my life, as a promise that his kindness would be repaid." The court fell silent. The royal seal was no small thing. It was a symbol of the deepest trust, given only to those who had earned the eternal gratitude of the royal family. For the queen to give such a treasure to a human was unprecedented. It changed everything. Doran stepped forward again. His face was troubled, but his voice was careful. "Your Majesty," he said slowly, "we do not doubt that this human helped you in the past. But that was 10 years ago. Much has changed since then. He is a soldier in the enemy fleet. He has fought against our people. He has killed our warriors. Whatever debt you owe him cannot erase those facts." Lyra stood and faced her advisor directly. "I have not forgotten those facts," she replied. "But I also cannot forget who I was, and who helped me become who I am today. Without this human, I would have died on that frozen moon. There would be no Queen Lyra. There would be no peace talks, no reform programs, no efforts to end this war. Everything I have done as queen exists because one human soldier chose mercy over duty." She paused, letting her words sink in. "And that," she continued, "tells me something important about humanity. Something that perhaps we have been too blind to see." A young noble pushed through the crowd. His name was KL, and he was known for his hatred of humans. His brother had died in the war 3 years earlier, killed by human soldiers during a battle near the border. Since then, Kale had become one of the loudest voices calling for the complete destruction of Earth. "This is madness," he shouted. "You would spare the life of an enemy because of sentiment? Because of some childhood memory? Your Majesty, with all respect, you are letting your emotions cloud your judgment. This human is a killer. All humans are killers. Showing him mercy will only make us look weak." Several nobles nodded in agreement. The calls for Taeho's execution began to grow louder. Some demanded that he be made an example to all humans. Others wanted him questioned for military secrets before being killed. The mood in the room was turning dark and dangerous. Lyra raised her hand, and silence fell once more. "You speak of weakness," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "But let me tell you what I have learned about strength. True strength is not the ability to destroy your enemies. True strength is the ability to choose a different path when destruction seems like the only option." She turned in a slow circle, addressing everyone in the hall. "This human found me dying," she continued. "He could have left me there. He could have reported my location and watched his commanders come to capture or kill me. He could have taken revenge for every Valari life lost in this war. But he did none of those things. Instead, he carried me to safety. He treated my wounds. He stayed by my side for 3 days, risking his own life to save mine." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "He did this not because he had to, but because he chose to. He looked at an enemy and saw a person worth saving. And if one human can make that choice, then perhaps all humans are capable of the same. Perhaps this war does not have to end in extinction. Perhaps there is another way." The hall was completely still. Even Kale had fallen silent, unable to respond to the Queen's words. Taeho watched from his knees, amazed by the woman standing before him. The wounded girl he had saved had become something extraordinary. She had become a leader willing to challenge her own people for the sake of what was right. Doran stepped closer to the Queen. His expression had changed. The concern was still there, but something else had joined it. Something that looked almost like hope. "What would you have us do, Your Majesty?" he asked quietly. Lyra looked down at Taeho. Their eyes met, and in that moment, 1,000 unspoken words passed between them. Gratitude and wonder. Fear and determination. The weight of the past and the possibility of the future. "I would have us be better than we have been," she said. "I would have us remember that mercy is not weakness. Kindness is not foolishness. And sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is offer our hand to someone who has been taught to hate us." She reached down and took Taeho's chained hands in her own. "This man will not be executed," she declared. "He will be my guest. And when the time is right, he will help me show both our peoples that peace is possible." The court erupted once more, but this time the voices were mixed. Some still called for blood, but others, more than before, seemed willing to listen. The Queen had planted a seed. Whether it would grow into something beautiful or be crushed before it could bloom remained to be seen. But for now, in this moment, Taeho was alive. And the girl he had saved had become his salvation in return. 3 days passed after the throne room confrontation. Taeho was given quarters in the eastern wing of the palace. The room was larger than any place he had ever lived. Crystal walls rose around him, catching the light of distant stars and scattering it into rainbows that danced across the floor. A bed of silver fabric waited in one corner. Softer than clouds, food arrived on floating trays, carried by servants who bowed deeply before leaving without a word. It was a beautiful prison. The chains were gone from his wrists, but guards stood outside his door at all hours. He could walk the length of the room. He could look out the windows at the purple sky. But he could not leave. He was still a prisoner, even if his cage was made of luxury instead of iron. On the 4th morning, the door opened and Queen Lyra walked in. She had changed since the throne room. Her royal robes were replaced by simpler clothes, dark blue fabric that made her silver skin seem to glow. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, falling in waves of midnight black. Without the crown and the veil, she looked younger. She looked more like the girl Taeho remembered from the frozen moon. "You did not sleep," she said, noticing the shadows under his eyes. Taeho shook his head. "It is hard to sleep when you do not know if tomorrow will come." Lyra walked to the window and looked out at the stars. Her reflection stared back at her from the crystal surface, ghostly and pale. "The War Council met last night," she said quietly. "They debated your fate for 6 hours. Half of them want you dead. They say your execution would send a message to Earth. It would show humanity that the Valari Empire cannot be defeated, cannot be softened, cannot be changed by one act of ancient kindness." Taeho felt his stomach tighten. He had expected this. He had known from the moment he recognized Lyra that his survival was not guaranteed. Saving a princess 10 years ago did not erase the war between their peoples. It did not undo the blood that had been spilled on both sides. And the other half? He asked. Lyra turned to face him. Her golden eyes were filled with something that might have been sadness. The other half remembers that I am queen, she said. They may not agree with my decision, but they understand that challenging me directly would be unwise. For now, their loyalty holds. But that could change if I push too hard. She crossed the room and sat down in a chair across from him. The distance between them was small, but it felt like an ocean. I need to tell you something, she continued. Something I should have told you years ago. If I had ever found a way to reach you. Teho leaned forward. I am listening. Lyra took a deep breath. When you found me on that moon, I was not just a lost traveler. I was a princess fleeing for my life. My father, the king, had been murdered 3 days earlier. His advisors had been killed as well. There was a group within our government that wanted to seize power, and they decided that the royal family needed to be eliminated. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. They killed my mother first, then my brothers. One by one. I was the youngest. I was supposed to be easy prey. But my personal guard sacrificed himself to give me time to escape. I took a small ship and ran. I ran without knowing where I was going. I ran until my ship was shot down over that frozen moon. Teho felt his heart ache for her. He had known that she was running from danger, but he had never imagined the scale of it. She had lost everything. Her family, her home, her entire world. The people who did this, he said slowly. What happened to them? Lyra's eyes hardened. They thought they had won. They thought the royal line was ended. But they underestimated the loyalty of our military. When I returned, rescued by my own fleet, the people rallied behind me. The traitors were found and brought to justice. I became queen at the age of 17, the youngest ruler in our history. She paused, her gaze distant. But there are still those who oppose me, she admitted. Those who believe I am too young, too soft, too willing to consider peace with humanity. They do not say it openly, but I can feel their hatred in every council meeting, every formal dinner, every whispered conversation that stops when I enter a room. Teho understood now. The queen's position was fragile. By saving him, she had exposed herself to her enemies. She had given them a weapon they could use against her. Why? He asked. Why take this risk for me? I am just one soldier. My life is not worth the stability of your empire. Lyra stood and walked toward him. She stopped just inches away, close enough that he could see the gold flecks within her golden eyes. Because you are not just one soldier, she said firmly. You are proof that humans are capable of mercy. You are proof that this war does not have to be fought until one side is completely destroyed. And you are proof that I am not a fool for believing in peace. She reached out and took his hand in hers. 10 years ago, you saved my life because it was the right thing to do. You did not ask for reward. You did not calculate the risks. You simply saw someone who needed help, and you helped them. That kind of goodness is rare in this universe. It is worth protecting. It is worth fighting for. Teho looked down at their joined hands. Her skin was cool against his warmth, silver against brown. Two species that had been killing each other for years, connected by a single act of kindness. What happens now? He asked. Lyra released his hand and stepped back. Her royal composure returned, settling over her like armor. Tomorrow, the full council will meet, she announced. All the noble houses, all the military commanders, all the advisors who think they know better than their queen. They will demand your execution. They will call for human blood to satisfy their anger. And I will refuse them. They will not accept that, Teho said. No, Lyra agreed. They will not. But I am not asking them to accept it. I am telling them that this is how it will be. I am their queen, chosen by tradition and proven through fire. If they want to challenge my authority, they are welcome to try. But they should remember what happened to the last group that thought they could remove me from power. Her words were hard, but Taeho could see the fear behind them. She was brave, perhaps the bravest person he had ever met. But she was also alone, a young queen surrounded by wolves, fighting for a peace that her own people did not want. "Let me help," he said suddenly. Lyra looked at him with surprise. "Help? How?" Taeho stood and faced her directly. "I am a soldier. I know how to fight. I know how to protect. And I know that you need allies right now, even if they come from unexpected places." He took a step closer. "You saved my life today, just as I saved yours 10 years ago. That makes us even in terms of debts. But it does not make us strangers. We are connected, you and I, by fate, by choice, by whatever force brought us together twice against all odds." He paused, searching for the right words. "Let me stand beside you tomorrow," he continued. "Not as a prisoner begging for mercy, but as a witness to the truth. Let me tell your council what humans are really like. Let me show them that we are not the monsters they believe us to be. And let me prove that your faith in peace is not misplaced." Lyra stared at him for a long moment. Emotions flickered across her face, too fast to identify. Fear, hope, doubt, determination. Finally, she nodded. "Very well," she said. "Tomorrow, you will speak to the council. You will tell them your story. And together, we will face whatever comes next." She turned toward the door but stopped before leaving. "Taeho," she said without looking back. "Thank you. For everything. For the frozen moon. For today. For believing that some things are worth more than war." Then she was gone, leaving him alone with the stars, and the weight of tomorrow pressing down on his shoulders. He did not sleep that night either. But this time, it was not fear that kept him awake. It was something else. Something that felt almost like hope. The Grand Council chamber was the largest room in the palace. It had been built 1,000 years ago, when the Valari Empire first rose to power. The walls were made of black stone, carved with the faces of ancient rulers who watched over their descendants with stern, judging eyes. A circular floor stretched beneath a dome of crystal that showed the endless stars above. Seats rose in tiers around the center, filled with nobles and commanders who wore their finest robes and sharpest expressions. Every important Valari in the Empire was present. They had come from distant worlds, from orbital stations, from battleships still warm from war. They had come because the Queen had called them, and they had come because they wanted blood. Taeho walked into the chamber with his head held high. He wore no chains this time. Lyra had insisted on that. Instead, he wore simple clothes provided by the palace. Dark fabric that made him look less like a prisoner and more like a visitor. Guards walked beside him, but they did not touch him. They did not push or pull or threaten. They simply escorted him to the center of the room, where a single circle of light waited on the floor. The whispers began immediately. Taeho ignored them. He had faced worse than angry stares. He had survived battles that should have killed him. He had walked through fire and ice, and the vacuum of space. A room full of hostile aliens was not going to break him now. Queen Lyra sat on a throne at the highest point of the chamber. She wore her full royal regalia today. White robes trimmed with silver, a crown of twisted metal that caught the starlight and threw it back in shards of brilliance. The veil was gone. She wanted everyone to see her face. She wanted them to know that she was not hiding anything. Old Doran stood beside her, his black robes making him look like a shadow given form. His expression was neutral, carefully controlled. He had not argued against the Queen's decision, but he had also not voiced his support. He was waiting to see which way the wind would blow. The young noble Kael was present as well. He sat in the front row of the military section, surrounded by officers who shared his hatred for humanity. His golden eyes burned with fury as he watched Taeho take his place in the center of the room. If looks could kill, the human would have died 1,000 times over. Lyra raised her hand, and silence fell across the chamber. "You have all been called here to witness a choice," she announced. Her voice carried to every corner of the room, strong and clear. "A choice that will shape the future of our empire." A choice that will determine whether we continue down a path of endless war or take the first steps toward something better. She stood from her throne and began to descend the steps toward the center floor. For 15 years, we have fought against humanity, she continued. We have won battles and lost them. We have celebrated victories and mourned our dead. We have told ourselves that this war was necessary, that humans were monsters who could not be reasoned with, that the only way to ensure our survival was to destroy them completely. She reached the bottom of the steps and walked toward Tejo. But I stand before you today to say that we were wrong. The chamber exploded with voices. Nobles shouted in protest. Commanders rose from their seats. Kale's voice cut through the noise like a blade, calling the queen a traitor and demanding her removal. For a moment, it seemed like the entire room might descend into chaos. Then Lyra spoke again, and her voice somehow cut through everything. Silence. It was not a request. It was a command, issued with the full weight of royal authority. The voices died away, one by one, until only the echo of her word remained. You will listen, she said coldly. All of you. Because what I am about to tell you is more important than your anger. More important than your pride. More important than anything you have ever heard before. She turned in a slow circle, meeting the eyes of everyone who dared to look at her. This man, she said, gesturing toward Tejo, is Sergeant Tejo of the United Earth Fleet. He is a soldier. He has fought against us in battle. He has killed Valari warriors in combat. By every measure of our law and tradition, he should be executed. She paused, letting the tension build. But 10 years ago, this same man found me dying on a frozen moon. My ship had crashed. My guards were dead. I was 17 years old, running from assassins who had already murdered my entire family. I was alone, wounded, and waiting to die. Her voice softened slightly, though it lost none of its power. He could have killed me. It would have been easy. One blow to end the life of a Valari princess. One act of violence to avenge all the humans who had died in this war. But he did not do that. Instead, he carried me to safety. He treated my wounds. He stayed with me for 3 days, risking his own career and his own life to save someone who was supposed to be his enemy. She looked at Tejo, and something warm passed between them. He did not know who I was. He did not know that he was saving the future queen. He only knew that he had found a person who needed help, and he chose to give it. That is the kind of being he is. That is the kind of beings humans can be. She turned back to face the council. I am not asking you to forget the war. I am not asking you to ignore the pain we have suffered. But I am asking you to consider that perhaps we have been wrong about humanity. Perhaps there are humans out there who are capable of mercy. Perhaps there are humans who want peace just as much as we do. Kale stood from his seat. His face was twisted with rage. Words, he spat. Pretty words to hide the truth. One human showed mercy once. That proves nothing. The rest of them are still killers. They will never stop attacking us. They will never accept peace. Showing them kindness will only make them think we are weak. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the military section. Lyra nodded slowly. You may be right, she admitted. Humans may refuse peace. They may see our offer as weakness. They may continue to fight until one of our species is completely destroyed. She stepped closer to Kale, looking up at him without fear. But what if you are wrong? She asked. What if there are humans who want this war to end? What if they are waiting for a chance to prove that their species is more than violence and hatred? What if the only reason this war continues is because neither side has been brave enough to make the first move toward peace? Kale opened his mouth to respond, but Lyra continued before he could speak. I am willing to take that risk, she declared. I am willing to reach out to humanity and offer them a choice. War or peace. Destruction or cooperation. Death for all or life for both. And I believe that at least some of them will choose peace. She turned to Tejo. This man will be my proof, she announced. He will return to Earth as my ambassador. He will carry my message to his leaders. He will tell them that the Valari Empire is ready to negotiate, and he will show them that cooperation between our species is possible. The chamber erupted again. But this time the voices were different. Some were still angry, still calling for blood, but others were curious, thoughtful, willing to listen. Old Doran descended from the throne platform. He walked to the center of the floor and raised his staff. "I have served this empire for 60 years, he said loudly. "I have seen 3 wars and 2 coronations. I have watched queens rise and fall. And in all that time, I have never seen a ruler as brave as the one who stands before you now." He turned to face the nobles and commanders. "She asks us to try something different, to take a chance on peace instead of choosing the certainty of continued war. It is a risk, yes. But it is a risk worth taking, because if she is right, we could end this conflict without losing another generation of our children. And if she is wrong, we can always return to fighting." He bowed deeply to Lyra. "I support the Queen's decision," he declared. "And I call upon all loyal subjects of the Empire to do the same." The tide began to turn. More voices rose in support. More nobles nodded their agreement. Even some of the military commanders seemed willing to give the plan a chance. Kale stood alone in his anger, surrounded by a shrinking group of supporters. He glared at Tejo with hatred that would never fade. But he had lost this battle. The Queen had won. Lyra walked to Tejo and extended her hand. "Go home," she said softly. "Tell your people that the Valari Queen offers peace. Tell them that one human soldier taught her that mercy is strength. And tell them that we are ready to build a new future together." Tejo took her hand. Their fingers intertwined briefly, a moment of connection that spanned species and history and war. "I will," he promised, "and I will make sure they listen." He left the Valari homeworld 3 days later, aboard a diplomatic vessel carrying messages of peace to Earth. The war did not end immediately. Negotiations took years. Old hatreds died slowly. But eventually, painfully, beautifully, the 2 species found common ground. Trade agreements were signed. Cultural exchanges began. For the first time in a generation, humans and Valari worked together, instead of trying to destroy each other. Tejo became Earth's first permanent ambassador to the Valari Empire. He spent the rest of his life building bridges between 2 peoples who had almost annihilated each other, and whenever he met with Queen Lyra, they would share a smile that only they understood. A smile that remembered a frozen moon, a crashed ship, a wounded girl, and a choice that changed the galaxy forever. The universe learned an important lesson in those years. Humans were dangerous, yes. They could fight. They could kill. They could survive anything the stars threw at them, but they could also show mercy. They could choose kindness over hatred. They could look at an enemy and see a friend worth saving. And that, perhaps, made them the most dangerous allies of all.